is we will do the following. First, I'm going to go over a research strategy. You all should have picked up a handout up front. If not, anybody still need one? Up there. And this will both be substantive in terms of what you might want to think about when approaching a major research project, but it will also serve as a substantive checklist for the exam. And I'll talk about the exam in a moment. And the reason I say that is I believe, if I may say so myself, that I have put most of the course in these 4 pages. And we will go over that in just a minute. And as I said, it should be a good review for the exam as well. We will then look at some of the research resources that may be coming our way in the future as by way of a break for our brains after looking into strategy. And then after that, we will, as I have been promising all semester, go over the format of the exam. And we'll spend about half the class talking about that. This will be your first, but absolutely, definitely not your only opportunity to ask questions about the exam. Okay, so let's take a look at the checklist. So this pretty much covers, as I said, most of what we've gone over for the past 14 weeks. You will not likely do all of these things for every single research project. In fact, you will rarely do all of these things for a particular research project. Sometimes you'll have to have a real quick and dirty search that will take you an hour because that's how long you have. This is not intended to suggest that you always need to do all of these things. So first step, of course, as we start out the semester, take a look at your problem, analyze your facts. Start to think about preliminary questions. This is our classic issue spotting term generation. We did a couple of these exercises and I made some suggestions about how you might want to think about that. So for instance, for your assignment question, we talked about how that was not a products liability question and it was more because there was no product for your client. So you want to start to think about what your issue is and also be careful, try to think about what rabbit holes you don't want to go down. Another thing to think about also, of course, is terminology. So for our question that we've talked about in class all semester, our client with insurance issues, we learned about terminology like managed care. So this is what you want to start to do as you think about issue spotting. And again, you want to be flexible with that terminology. For your assignment hypothetical, some of you, many of you, learned about the term misbranding as you took a look at secondary sources and whatnot. You want to think about when you do a search and you get 0 results, or you get a whole bunch of results and they don't seem relevant, think about revising your search, making it narrower, making it broader. Maybe you do need to include the word tea. Maybe you don't need to include the word polyphenols. There's no way of knowing when you don't know anything about a topic. That's by definition, so be flexible. And by the way, this is also intended as a review, so if you have questions, please chime in as always. So I've been saying since the start of the semester, where do you want to start your research if you've got a big project where you don't know anything about? Secondary sources, I heard a mumbling in there. I'll go with it. Of course, where you start even with secondary sources depends on what you already know. So I suggest here that you might want to start with the very basic research guides or legal encyclopedia if you really don't know much about the topic. But there may be topics where there's a great treatise or a perfect amateur proof of facts, which I have listed here later in the process. It depends on what you know. It depends on what you find. As I've kept on saying throughout, if you find something useful, use it. Don't worry about the rules. These are general rules just to help give you guidance. ALR is another one that's a good place to start. If you don't find one, don't spend hours looking for an ALR. There frequently is not a good ALR article on a particular topic, but as we saw for our topic, There was a great ALR for our class topic. That liability of third-party payor turned out to be a great place to start for us. So sometimes you get lucky with ALR. And as I've said many times, Google, totally great place to start. Even Wikipedia, okay place just to orient yourself, increase your knowledge, get some terminology. Just don't stop there. I don't think I would do any kind of research project, even a quick and dirty one, just on a regular Google search. Now, you might go into Google Scholar for cases and do a quick search that way, and if that's all you have time for, that's all you have time for. But a regular Google search for legal research, I would never just do that. And of course, as we talked about in our first class, when you're looking at websites, when you do that Google search, and maybe you find a great source, think about what you're looking at. Think about our theme of bibliographic awareness. Remember our first exercise where there was one website that was very reliable and one that wasn't at all reliable and had a very particular viewpoint that might have skewed the facts some. So when you are Googling and you get to a new website, take a look at it and use some of that lateral reading strategy that we talked about in our first class. Okay, so once maybe you've refined your issues, you've Googled, maybe you found a great encyclopedia, Amjur article. Now you may want to dive in, if you do need to do an in-depth research project, to some of the other secondary sources we talked about. So treatises, law reviews, some of those practice manuals we just talked about a couple of weeks ago. If you do have to start drafting, think about form books, whether online or as part of a larger treatise. We talked about what I am calling the encyclopedic practice materials, the Amjur proof of facts. For our particular subject that we covered in class, the Amjur POF, and one group in our very first class actually found that article. It was a fabulous article. It was as good as, if not better than, the ALR, and would have been perfectly fine to start with if that's what you found, because it was useful. Again, if it's useful, use it. But remember, Amjur proof of facts, only on Westlaw, can be really useful for more than just the wonderful explanation it provided. It provided all those practice materials as well. We talked a little bit about topical databases. You took a look at RIA Checkpoint, which is a tax database. There are lots and lots of other topical databases out there. Someday you might use something called Cheetah that's put out by Wolters Kluwer. That's another one that covers a whole range of different topics. And we talked a fair amount, and you all had really good questions when we talked about guidance from agencies. I don't know if you remember in our first class when we were Googling, we came up with actually an agency document. I think it was the Department of Labor for our ERISA question. That was kind of useful. Guidance from agencies is kind of, it has its foot in both secondary and primary camps. It's secondary because it helps explain it, and it tells us what the agency is expecting. It's kind of primary because it's from the agency, and that's one of the sources of the law. I think if I were pressed, I would say it's really more secondary because it's not mandatory authority. You don't have to follow the guidance the agency gives you. It's just a darn good idea. Okay, so we good with our review of secondary sources so far. Turning the page. So of course I list here why I keep on telling you that you should start your research in secondary sources. We've talked about these. Again, I'll highlight terminology that's really key, and I hope you're getting a sense of that if you've done the research that we've done in class for the workshops, for our class example, as well as doing the research for your assignment. Finding the right terms is absolutely imperative. And again, I'm trying to convince you still, I hope I've succeeded in secondary sources. Someone else has done the work for you. Why reinvent the wheel? So if you can find a good secondary source, it's a place to go. Now, granted, you won't always for every single topic. There's just no way we could have something available for every possible topic you could ever run into, but it's worth your while to search. And even if you don't find on the exact topic, a lot of times you'll find hints. And what I find, and I'll talk about this later at the end of the handout, research is kind of like a detective hunt. Probably one reason I love it. I loved detective stories when I was a kid. You go to one source, and it doesn't tell you exactly what you want, unless you're really super lucky, but it gives you a little hint. You take that hint and you go somewhere else, and that gives you another little hint. Sometimes you get sidetracked by accident to something that's not useful, as good detective stories usually send you that way. But then you come back and you keep on going until you finally cull out those all-important primary sources, the statutes, the cases, the regulations. And throughout your research process, again, for really in-depth research projects, you want to be evaluating your strategy. Think about, like I said before, think about your search terms. Do you need to broaden your search if you're getting 0 results? Maybe polyphenols is not a great term. Maybe it's too broad, maybe you narrow. Maybe try putting in tea or bottled drink. Maybe you need to be a little more fact-specific. There's no way I can tell you a perfect formula for every single issue. You have to experiment. Some issues will be very fact-specific, some will be less so. Given your knowledge, will you need, here on the third bullet point under evaluate, given your knowledge, do you need to revise your preliminary questions? Most of the time, the answer to that is going to be, yeah, you need to revise because you're going to be learning about new issues as you go along. Think about our class issue. When we first started liability of HMO, we learned about this whole issue about preemption that unless you were familiar with ERISA, you might not have even known existed. And so we spent most of the semester exploring that one narrow issue of preemption for our client. But as we went, we also learned, well, if we're preempted, then maybe we need to bring a civil suit under Section 1132. We didn't do much research on that within the course, but that's for, this was really your client. You would need to do research for that as well. We also encountered some reference to maybe fiduciary duty of the health insurance might have something to do with this. We don't even know if that's relevant or not. That's another path that we learned about through our research that you would need to explore. So again, you will come up with lots of different questions as you're doing your research. Okay, I'm going to move on to primary authority for our research strategy. So while I suggest that you don't have to check every single secondary source, and every single secondary source may not have something relevant to your issue, you do have to check for every single type of primary authority. Listed here, statutes, cases, regulations, which may include court rules and administrative materials, those decisions and guidance we've been talking about. So that is not optional. Don't forget to check all 3, and that goes for real life as well as when I talk about the exam later, which I will say it is about another half dozen at least times. So let's dive into statutes. Of course, statutes, if you are looking at statutes, you want to remember to look in your best friend, the annotated code. So I've been joking about that all semester. People think statutes, and so they see here the word statutes at large. Oh, I'll just go to statutes at large. Remember, statutes at large tells you just over time the different statutes Congress has passed. When you're doing actual statutory research for a client for what the law is today, you want to be looking in the relevant code. And of course, that's the USCA or USCS for federal, and it's whatever your state code is. Here in New York, we tend to use McKinney's. So how do you find these relevant code sections? Again, we've been reviewing this, and I've been trying to draw this out for you several times across the semester. Where might we find relevant statutory code sections? Or how and where would be a better way to phrase that. It's right here on the paper. Secondary sources. I know, we've said this 100 times, going for 101 there. Secondary sources. You also want to make sure to always do a separate keyword search. As great as secondary sources are, they will be on one particular area or one particular issue. They may not address the entire complexity of your issue. The issue you talked about, you researched for your assignment, is a great example. On the federal end, there was the sections that you found having to do with false advertising, and then there were also the sections you had found and that was in Title 15, and then there were sections in Title 21 having to do with food. I may have gotten those switched, but it doesn't matter. In other words, there are two distinct areas where you could have found, where there are relevant statutes, and if you just relied on one secondary source or one search, you would have missed one. So look at secondary sources, do an independent keyword search. And I list here why you care about, why the annotated code is indeed your very best friend. And I'm going to pull up an example here. And one thing you want to make sure to do, and we've talked about this a whole bunch of times, but especially when you're dealing with codes, when you're dealing with statutory codes like the U.S. Code, when you're dealing with regulatory codes like the CFR, make sure you have oriented yourself and you're looking at the heading, at the table of contents, because this will tell you where your statute sits in the larger statutory scheme. Remember, I used that term, or context. So 1144 is right up here in Employee Retirement Income Security Program. In our statutory assignment, some of you found sections, I think, having to do with either poultry or meat, and I put in the comments that this isn't an issue about poultry or meat, it's about tea. I understand why you got confused. It's easy to do that with these online systems because you put in your terminology, false advertising, and you saw a result that had your words in it. Yay, false advertising. But you neglected to do what I'm saying now and look up at the top at the heading in the table of contents information to see that that particular section on false advertising had to do with chicken or poultry or meat. It didn't have to do with what you needed to find out about, which of course was tea and beverages. And again, this heading information is referring to this interchangeably as table of contents because that's essentially what we're looking at, is the table of contents for this section. If you went to the table of contents here or on Lexis on the side, you'd see the same information. You'd see it within its context, and you want to check the table of contents not only to make sure that you are looking at a section relevant to your issue, but you want to see if there are other relevant sections. This is what makes research so much of a detective hunt, because a lot of times in secondary sources or in your keyword search, you'll pull up a section that's close, but it actually won't really be the relevant one. But if you look at the table of contents, you will discover, oh wait, 2 sections earlier, that's the one I want. Or as we scroll up, we might discover, oh look, civil enforcement. I may need something about enforcement for my client. I might want to take a look at that as well. So that table of contents, when you're dealing with any kind of code or really any kind of resource that is arranged by subject, is really going to help you a lot. Questions? Okay. So looking at point 4 under statutes, if needed, which is rare, legislative history. We did spend a couple of weeks on it because it is the most intricate area, but it really is something that isn't done regularly or much at all. But I did tell you the story of a student who was in this very class last year who was doing legislative history research for the firm that she was working for at the direction of the attorney. And this was last year. This wasn't 100 years ago. So it does happen. So if you do need to do legislative history research and you are trying to get a sense of the intent of the legislature, remember you want to look for committee reports, at least when we're talking about federal statutes. And you want to be able to identify what I keep on calling that all-important public law number. And remember, here on Westlaw, we do that in the credits. On Westlaw, on Lexis, it's called history. And here are those public law numbers. And remember, I had to do that silly exercise where we read through and amended by every time I pointed to a semicolon. Make sure you understand that. And likewise, for state statutes, you find it in the same place. It's not quite as complex, usually. And then we see here we have a whole lot of public law numbers. So, okay, how do I know if I'm looking for particular language what the intent of Congress was? How do I know which of these dozen or so public law citations do I look at? Anybody remember? Does this give you any hint? I don't know if you can read it from all the way in the back. Excellent. Editor and reviser's notes. And it's a little bit tricky. If research were easy, we wouldn't be in a class for it. You need to scroll down to where you see amendments, and then each public law is what it did for your section, or the section we're looking at, 1144. It describes what that public law, how that public law changed section 1144. So rather than looking at a dozen or so public laws, this can help you narrow it down. If you don't see anything of in your language here, then you probably want to look at the original enacting public law. And do you all remember what I mean by the enacting public law? It's the first one. Hopefully that makes sense, right? If it's enacting, that's the first one, and then amending are the later ones. Questions? Turning to page 3, state legislative history. Find it. Westlaw's probably going to be your best bet online. Lexis honestly isn't that great. Likewise Bloomberg, or basically online, your state's legislative website, and finding whatever documents your state publishes. New York actually is pretty good. It has the chapter laws, and remember we found that at that one site from the New York Assembly where you could look up your chapter law, and then you could get some of the chapter memoranda. Okay, now you knew this was coming, right? What do you need to remember? I hear somebody, yeah, update, and update. So easy, super easy with statutory codes and actually regulatory codes. It just tells us right here. Westlaw tells us currentness, so we know that this is current through PL. It doesn't give us the date, which is a little bit annoying, 116-5, but we started with the 116th Congress back in January, so I know this is pretty up to date. Lexis actually gives us the actual date, which is a little bit easier. And of course, the other aspect of updating is a court can determine that parts or all, it's usually more often just parts of your section, is not constitutional, but as we discussed, thanks to Jessica's great question, you need to make that analysis very carefully. So here it's telling us unconstitutional or preempted. If I just looked at that and say, oh, this section doesn't count anymore, this section is invalid, I would be very mistaken, because if I looked at this New Hampshire case carefully, what I would discover is it invalidated only a very small, insignificant part, which actually is no longer even in the text of what I'm reading in terms of the current code. So it's important to follow up on those links, but you need to make a very careful analysis. And look, I give you a tip. Check table of contents. What a surprise. Again, looking at the chapters and articles, it can help you a lot finding either more relevant sections or the most relevant section. And as I mentioned before, you also, always a good idea to keep your eyes open for definitions. Either special definition sections that are in the code, or within a particular code section, there might be a subsection that says definitions. We're dealing with law. Law is made up of words, or as I like to say very ungrammatically, law is words. You can quote me on that. And if law is words, then the definition of those words are critical, right? So you want to watch out for those definitions. Yeah?
So on Westlaw, how current it is always at the bottom, and then Lexis is at the top.
Lexis, let's take a look. And let's go to and again, make sure you understand the difference between how current your code is, which is what we're talking about, versus when your section was last amended. When your section was last amended is usually less important, not a very important consideration. Okay, so absolutely right. Current through PL 116-8 approved 3/8/19. So if I were evaluating Lexis, I would say Lexis is better than Westlaw in this case of allowing me to update more easily because it gives me the date. Why Westlaw doesn't is beyond me. Excellent question. Any others, or shall I move on to cases? Case research. Okay, so now I'm talking about judicial decisions or cases. And again, we want to follow up any references we found in secondary sources. We also want to follow up any references we find in our annotated codes. So you won't always find relevant references, but make sure to check the case notes or the notes of decisions. Those are the same exact things. It's just Lexis calls it case notes sometimes, and Westlaw calls it notes of decisions. Westlaw at least is always a little more consistent. So notes of decisions, and our notes of decisions gives us topics. So it's a great way to find relevant case law if we already have a statute section. That's why I keep on saying your annotated code is your BFF. So make sure to follow up on those notes of decisions or case notes. You can also use citing references. They're slightly different. I happen to like the notes of decisions better because it is topically arranged, but citing references are good too. Follow up any other good references you get, whether you want to do a quick keyword search on Google Scholar. Now remember, not regular Google, but Google Scholar, where you can search for the cases specifically. And just by way of example, Google Scholar. So you can see I'm Googling, so this is regular Google. What I want to do my case research on is Google Scholar in the case law. Some of you in your assignment used other free websites. FindLaw was one popular one. That's okay too. A couple of you, I think, used Legal Information Institute. That's okay also. Frankly, Google Scholar, I think, is got a better search algorithm and is getting more and more, making more and more cases of case law available going further back in time. So my first instinct would be Google Scholar, but if you like the others, that's fine too. So if you get a good case, we go to the one good case method that we talked about. So you found a good case. You want to take a look at the head notes and key numbers. So let's go to one case we looked at. Go. So it's a great way, looking at the head notes or key numbers, a great way to see if this case is relevant for your issue, but it's also a great way to take one good case once you determine it is relevant for your issue and find other cases by using the links. You can use the key numbers here at whatever level you think is the most useful for your issue. You can also go to other cases that cite to this head note, or Shepherdize this head note is the equivalent on Lexis. So again, you want to supplement with looking for cases a couple of different ways. Maybe you want to try a full text case. Some of you had great evaluations in your assignment where it gives you a broader scope, so it gives you more flexibility in terms of what cases you retrieve. That's a great point. You also, in addition to full text searching, want to try another method because maybe you used a keyword that threw off your search a little bit and didn't pull up another relevant line of cases. Take a look at the head notes. Take a look at secondary sources. As they say here under number 3, supplement full text searching with other approaches such as key number filters. or search by headnote, or shepherdized or key citing. There are all those different ways listed here. Questions? I'm not going through and going through each method in depth. We did that when we talked about cases, and we'd be here for another semester if I did that. So if you do have questions about anything particular, feel free to ask now, later. Okay, once again, key to remember to update, update, and update. You must either key cite or shepherdize whatever case you are relying on. Again, pretty easy, except when you key cite or shepherdize, again, get out of the habit from first year of just seeing the color flag or seeing the signal and saying, oh, case is not good law, or oh, case is overruled. You need to take a look and see what the overruling or reversing case said about yours. Maybe it was on an issue that's not your issue. For all the other issues, the case is still good law. Or maybe it's so narrow that it doesn't apply to you, or it applies to a set of facts that aren't your facts. So you need to make a more careful analysis when you do see the signal. Maybe it's from a different jurisdiction. That's also very important. In fact, you probably should do that first. Make sure, if we're in New York and it's a Connecticut case, we don't really care, depending on the issue. Any questions? Okay, and last but certainly not least, for primary sources, what we just were talking about a couple of weeks ago, regulations and administrative materials. Please, please, please don't forget this on your exam, and certainly in real life, more importantly. There seems to be a tendency I found in the past when I have looked at exam submission, maybe just because it comes toward the end of the exam, people forget it. This is just as important as the other types of primary sources, sometimes more importantly, because a lot of times, a lot of the issues that we deal with day to day, that clients come to see attorneys for day to day, are dealt by regulations, because those are the most specific. Those are delegated authority by the legislature. So the regulations deal with the rules that we all have to follow, or our clients as businesses have to follow day to day. So they are still very important. Same concepts I've just reviewed apply to regulations as well as to statutes. Find references in secondary sources. Find references in annotated codes. Sometimes you may want to look, especially for highly regulated areas, there tend to be more topical databases, more specialized treatises in these areas. Think securities law. There are tons of specialized resources and treatises for securities law, for tax, for environmental. These are all highly regulated areas where the regulations are key to whatever analysis you're going to do. Remember though, because these regulations are so specific, they're really hard to do keyword searching unless you already know all the relevant keywords in your area, which you will get to know as you become more conversant in an area. But if you don't know anything about a particular area, then it's hard to know what the relevant terminology is. Think, we're talking about preemption. Who knew about preemption until we did some research about it? So you want to use a couple of different methods when you're researching regulatory codes. And again, you want to be in the code because that's where the current regulations are. CFR for federal, whatever your state code is, it's the NYCRR here in New York. So sometimes an index can be really useful because you can kind of just scan through the words and figure out what the terminology is if you're having a hard time with it. And again, the indexes are online. You don't have to go to the old-fashioned print index if you're not comfortable with that. And again, because we're dealing with the code, checking the table of contents is absolutely critical. If possible, even more so for regulatory codes. Again, just because that terminology is so specific. We saw when we looked at the CFR, there are a whole bunch of different parts that might be relevant for our client. And the only way we discovered that was by looking at the table of contents. Our keyword searching, our secondary source searching got us to one point or the other in the CFR, but it didn't cover all of the possible relevant sections and parts. And again, updating, and updating is just as important. It's also really easy. Lexis and Westlaw make it pretty clear how up to date it is. Let's see if I can get to one real quick here. So notice I'm looking in my annotated code and citing references, but as you will also see, you don't, I'm in a case, no wonder. See, bibliographic awareness, I should follow my own advice. So back here in my BFF annotated code, if I look at citing references, keep my fingers crossed that I find regulations. So another way to find regulations, and I'm doing this being sort of lazy. Oh, look, definitions. Applies for regulations as well as statutory sections. You want to check those definition sections. And here on Westlaw, it's pretty straightforward. It does actually give us a date, as will Lexis. I think Lexis will appear on top, as it did with the USC. If you don't have Lexis or Westlaw, remember the ECFR. It's unofficial, but it's also about as up-to-date as Lexis and Westlaw. And again, don't forget about those administrative decisions and guidance. Again, the guidance is the agency telling you what it expects a client or a business or whatever area it regulates to do, and it gives you sort of prospective step-by-step on how to abide by the regulations. The decisions are more like judicial decisions in that they're sitting down and deciding an existing dispute or question. Both can be really useful. And you'll find the administrative decisions, again, either by searching, by checking the citing references within a CFR or a state code section, or on Lexis, the research references. Any questions on strategy for admin regulations and admin materials? Okay. And I call it one-stop research. That's true for some of the topical databases. Like if you were doing research, RIA Checkpoint would be one-stop research. I would go to, if I had a tax question and I had access to RIA, I would go there before Lexis or Westlaw. But a lot of times, these other practice materials that we talk about give you additional features, but it may not be really one-stop research. But remember they exist. Remember there are all of those form resources that we looked at online, sometimes very specialized treatises that are mostly forms, or other treatises that just include forms as well as other useful materials. Remember the practice guides, the checklists, as well, again, talking about the secondary sources, the AmJur proof of facts, the causes of action, again, that pull together what secondary sources do along with some of these forms and checklists and other more practice-oriented materials. So as I said earlier, research is a detective hunt, but it's also kind of like a spiral. It's not a, and I said this I think in the first class, it's not a step 1, step 2, step 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're done. You kind of have to go around your topic, and you start really broad with a Google search and secondary sources, and then you learn a little bit, and maybe you have to go back broad again and relearn preemption and the civil enforcement for our class example. But then you start to narrow in. So you learn, okay, preemption, 1144, civil enforcement, section 1132, got to take a look at my state. You learn maybe fiduciary duty, and maybe you have to go back out again to check out fiduciary duty, and then you circle in, and then you get more and more specific. You learn cases, maybe the case is really relevant, some regulatory sections. We looked at some of the administrative appeals for hearings, for insurance appeals, and you narrow in and you narrow in. And eventually, as you may have noticed, with our class example and with the assignment example, you start to see the same references, whether it's statutory references, case references, regulatory references, sometimes the same references to some of the secondary sources. We kept on coming back to that Amger POF article a lot. We found that the very first day we searched, and then we kept on coming back to that in the various different searches. So you go around till you start to narrow in to this critical mass of resources that you can sit down and analyze. And a lot of times you're still going to have to go back out to the spiral as you discover new avenues that you want to investigate. Again, throughout, you need to be making sure you're updating, because you don't want to go down a rabbit hole of checking out something, a case that's no longer valid for your particular issue. Also remember, Shepard's and Key's site are great research tools, so they can help you find some of these other materials as well. And finally, we haven't talked a lot about it since the first class, those current awareness sources. They may be a great place to start your secondary research. It depends on the issue, or they may be too specific when you're just starting your research and don't know much about the issue, but they may be great toward the end where you want to look at the current awareness sources. So the New York Law Journal, if you're here in New York, or whatever your state legal newspaper is, some of the BNA materials. I know a lot of you are not fans of BNA, but some of those BNA secondary sources, the law reports, are really great for very specialized topics that they cover. So it might be a good place to make sure that you're up to date. You see what's coming down the pike. Maybe there's a case that they talk about that's just been decided that you wouldn't have found yet because it was decided a week ago. And I mentioned before, and not surprisingly, I'll mention a bunch of more times, update, update, and update throughout. Again, make sure to Shepherd and Key site all cases. Make sure to check that code sections, both statutory codes, regulatory codes, not only are up to date, but don't have any cases that have decided your particular portion of your code section is invalid. We talk about it a lot in class. It's actually kind of unusual, but it does happen. We saw lots of examples, so you do need to be aware of that. And the question I get asked a lot is, when am I done? Because this sounds like a lot of work, right? And you're going to have time pressures. So I give you a couple of guidelines here. You will never find everything. There's always more to find, and you will have a lot of responsibilities. You'll be working on more than one issue at once, so at some point you're just going to have to stop and decide, I've done as much as I can. Good sign that it's a good place to stop. You've come up with the questions and you feel like you have decent answers to the questions. Again, you won't find every single thing that's out there, but you feel like you've answered the question. And you start to see a lot of repeat. We've seen the Aetna case, we've seen the statutory section, we've gone through Amger proof of facts, and we understand everything that's in there and what it's suggesting that we do. So those are the two good ways to think, okay, I've covered what I can. Any more research would not be productive or a good bang for the research buck, as it were. Any questions? Okay, so a few tips. As I said, okay that aren't on your sheet here. Okay to start with Google, just don't stop there. We talked about this in the very beginning. If you do have Lexis Westlaw, find out what your contract is. Less necessary for Bloomberg, because Bloomberg is flat rate. Less necessary if you have other databases. The RIA checkpoint I keep on talking about, that's flat rate. Lexis and Westlaw, as we talked about, the pricing is structure is really complex. Find out what's in your contract, find out what's not in your contract. Again, depending on your contract with Lexis and Westlaw, if you do have a reference to a case, a statute, and you can find it quickly for free, because your time is also very valuable, go on the New York legislative website to look up the New York statute if you have a reference. Go on Google Scholar to pull up a case just to read the text to see if it's even relevant. There are lots of free website sources that we talked about that are reputable, that are good if you have a known document. You can take a quick look without having to incur any cost on Lexis or Westlaw, again, depending upon your plan. some librarians have told me they encourage their associates to go to the free website, because even if it's in the plan, a certain amount of usage will cause their contract price to go up the following year. And I've had other librarians tell me in their particular firm, they tell the attorneys, just if it's in the plan, just use it, don't worry about it, your time. And it depends on how the negotiations go for any particular institution. So, moral of this story is ask. And also ask librarian, managing partner, your supervisor, whomever, what other databases you have out there. If you do have a tax question, do you have a tax database available? There are lots and lots of other databases we didn't go over, in part for time, in part because we don't have access to every single database that's out there. But see if there are flat rate databases. Some of you, actually all of you, because we looked at it, Hein Online is a flat rate database. So if you find a great law review article, you might get it on Hein Online. So those are online tips. I have a couple of librarian tips. Not that you're going to be librarians, but just what I've noticed over the years. Be curious about what you don't know. I know time is precious, but if you're researching an issue and you're just not understanding something, you're not clear, what is this fiduciary duty thing? Or what is this preemption thing? Especially both of them, really. You need to investigate to see if it's relevant. So be curious. Be adaptable, again, with your search terms especially, but just generally in your approach to a problem. Take advantage of training. These days there's so much great online training in the web that you could do at your convenience. It's also nice to get training in person, though. I know a lot of people learn better that way. I know sometimes I do. A lot of the reps, because they want your organization's business, they'll show up and have training day. If you can manage to fit it in your schedule, it's worthwhile. You will almost invariably come out learning something useful. Get to know your employer's resources. Get to know the people. What are the tech resources? What are the copying resources? How many librarians? If you work with one supervisor a lot, especially if you're in a particular area of the law, get to know their favorite sources. If they're an expert in that area, they know the good resources, and they're also going to expect you to check it, whether you know it's their favorite or not, so just ask them. Translate your skills. The term of art these days is scalability. So an example of that is I talk on and on about table of contents. Think about, where else could this be useful? Where else could these other techniques that we're talking about be useful? And last but certainly not least, be kind to the staff. As someone who has worked in the service biz a very long time, I can tell you when an attorney comes into the library and he or she is super nice and says hi and, asks and is very respectful, I will bend over backwards to do what I can to help them. There are once in a while, sadly, in every walk of life, not so pleasant folk, and if someone's kind of rude to me or, is very aggressive, I will ask them exactly I will answer whatever exactly they ask and no more. And that's just human nature. As human as the rest of them, and so are most of the folks you're going to be working with, whether they're in the copy department, the IT department, the librarian, the secretarial or administrative assistant pool, whoever. It makes a big difference. Okay, I'll get off that soapbox. Any questions about our strategy? Okay. So as I mentioned, what I'm going to do now is move on to what you might see in the future. And this is be a little less serious, give our brains a little bit of a break before we talk about the exam, and also to give you an introduction of what's out there. So of course you've all heard about AI, artificial intelligence, and big data. So how is all of this coming down in the legal research world? Well, you've all already encountered it quite a bit every time you type in, and actually I'm already limited here to New York and all federal. If you type in a phrase, so here I am So typing in very simple statute of limitations, something you always need to think about. So the AI that we've been seeing all along, Westlaw and Lexis does this too, comes up with these questions that it's guessing you might be asking. When does a statute of limitations begin to run? What is the statute of limitations for fraud? So statute of limitations, and I'm going to type in one more word, contract. So when is the statute of limitation for breach of an insurance contract? So what I would say with all this AI, it's really neat and can be really convenient, but you need to be really careful. So here it's telling me New York 6-year statute of limitation for breach of insurance contract, and it gives me a case, and the case would likely lead me to the appropriate CPLR. Right, close enough. CPLR section, oh look, NYCPLR 213, that is indeed the statute of limitations, so this is pretty good. And sometimes it'll be pretty good, and sometimes, actually going over here to Lexis. And this is not to say one service is better than the other. And I'm already in New York, so let's go to statute of limitations. And so we see here suggested questions down here. So same concept. I'm going to type in contract just like I did before. And what is statute of limitations for breach of contract? And we're working on it. And what it's referring to me is the Court of Claims Act, which there may or may not be statute of limitations within the Court of Claims, but that's not what I was asking. I was asking the general statute of limitations. So the point of this is not to say Lexis AI is terrible and Westlaw is great. They're going to trade off. The point is you can't abdicate your role as A, attorney, and B, intelligent human being to the AI, because it's still far from even close to being not only perfect, but I would say good. So that's a little bit of what's going on with AI. Big data. So Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg this is really competing in this area, and they're all trying to present themselves as the best area for this big data processing. You all, I hope, picked up a handout from the Lexis Context. That's the Lexis version of how they are approaching quote-unquote big data. I'm going to play for you a video about context regarding judge search, and then, because honestly they explain it better than I can, and it's a 2-minute video, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth.
Context is a litigation analytics solution that uses language analytics to uncover the citations and language judges rely upon most often, as well as revealing the motion outcome and grant and deny rates for motions. To begin searching for judges, simply type in the name of the judge in the red search box, and a word wheel will appear with suggested names. You can also access the judge profile directly by clicking on the drop-down arrow from the red search bar and select judge. As soon as you begin typing, the word wheel will begin to suggest judges' names. You can then select the judge's name you wish to search. If you do not see the judge's name you are looking for, you can click on the red magnifying glass to run a search and see all relevant names. The overview page provides high-level background information on the judge, including judicial experience, attorney experience prior to taking the bench, education, and contact information. Opinions by area of law displays the number of opinions the judge has written that we have in our case collection by practice area. Opinions per year displays opinions written by year. Under the Analytics tab, there are 2 sub-tabs, Motion Outcomes and Citation Patterns. Motion Outcomes provides a graphical display of the grant and deny rates on 100 motion types, with a list of those decisions for the selected motion type found here. The filtered drop-down allows you to narrow by practice practice area, or court. To view a particular set of motions, click on the Outcome Analysis portion of the graph. Citation Patterns shows you the language, cases, and judges that are most persuasive to the judge that you are arguing in front of. Here you see an interactive graphical display of the cases the judge relies upon most often in his or her opinions. There is also a display of the language from those opinions that the judge includes in his or her own written decisions. The language relied upon is displayed along with the number of the judge's opinions that cite to that language. The judges option displays the judges who authored the opinions that your judge relies upon the most. You will see the judges' names who have authored the opinions, which are shown here. In the Related Materials tab, you will see all available documents such as cases, dockets, and briefs, pleadings, and motions pertaining to your judge from across Lexis Advance. Using Context Judge Analytics, you can quickly and efficiently find answers to the most important questions, such as how your judge is likely to rule and what language he or she will use in his or her ruling.
Okay, so essentially all three services are doing the same thing. They're taking data from filings, and they're using the very powerful computers to analyze and draw conclusions based on how they slice and dice, as they say, the data. So looking at all the judges and what the outcomes are and what cases they relied in, and throwing all those billions of different data points, and I think billions is accurate, coming up with some of that analysis and some of those really neat graphs that you saw. Lexis also does that for expert witnesses as well, and there's a video here. So part of what I'm also trying to achieve right now as we're looking at this big data is to give you a sense of how you might investigate a new resource. Because I will be very honest with you up front here, I haven't used this very much. It's very new. I'm not a litigator. So to really get a sense of the strategy on how to use this, you would want to talk with a litigator. What we can do now is get a brief introduction just to give you a sense of what is out there and maybe just an idea of, oh, this is something I either want to investigate more or ask questions about to somebody who does actually use this and know more about it. So just so you can see, Bloomberg also, actually they started the whole field with this litigation analytics. And you can see Bloomberg's a little different because you can search by judge, attorney, law firm, or company and get different data points and different analyses of the different data points. And likewise, as we have been seeing throughout on Westlaw, we have the litigation analytics. And so one way I teach myself on how to use this stuff is to just do what I'm doing now and take a look and see what they have. If I have a pop-up like this, I might take the tour or watch that video we just saw. I would check out the other video on data analytics for experts. Finding those videos, Lexis has a whole range of them. If you go to the site, likewise Bloomberg, you can also just, again, Google. Lexis has a whole YouTube channel that you can investigate this. All of these companies are really pushing this litigation analytics these days, so it should be pretty easy to find even by just Googling. So, Jessica, Danielle, are you comfortable talking a little bit about how you use these, or if you'd rather not, that's fine too? I know you don't want to talk about names. We don't want to hear names.
Yeah, I can talk about what I did.
Okay, why don't we start with you, Jessica, and then Danielle?
So what I had to do was I had to look at a particular judge and how many of his cases on appeal were overturned when a particular attorney and law firm represented the respondent.
And you did that on Westlaw, right?
I did that on Westlaw and Lexis. So I used Lexis.
So,
Litigation Profile Suite.
So did you go to context or the litigation? Because here's context, what we just saw.
Yeah, I went to litigation profile suite. I didn't know about context.
Oh, okay.
I might have done context too because I met with the Lexis rep.
So for instance, and I'm not going to ask you for names, but if we put in the judge's name that they gave the example of, and then I'm guessing you went to analytics.
Well, I didn't use the context.
Oh.
I used litigation profile suite instead.
Okay, but so we can do this. So all right, I haven't actually done that, so let's take a look at that. But we're here to, so litigation profile suite is there. I imagine they ported in some of the information. The context is Lexis's newest product with the whole analysis of the judge, the language of the judge's opinions. So judge, and it looks kind of similar actually. Else? So the same kind of dockets. And what did you search for the,
And then from there, I think I went through, like, my judge didn't have as many dockets as this judge, so it was more reasonable for me to just look through the cases. There was only like maybe 40 cases or so.
okay. So interesting, because we'll take a look at Westlaw in a second. And this is, again, this is how I learn. So I take a look and I find an example to use. So using this particular judge, so under the analytics, we could search for an attorney's name this way, possibly. I don't know about practice area or court. And search by particular motions. On Westlaw, here in analytics, whoops, let's get the spelling right. And again, you see the graph somewhat similar. If you go to outcomes, you can actually search by attorney. So if this were the attorney of interest, and then we could narrow by outcome. So again, the different services have different search capabilities. I'm sure if you were to talk to our Lexis rep, she would tell you why Lexis is so fabulous and Westlaw doesn't have this. And then we look at Westlaw and we see that it has this ability to narrow by attorney and firm, and I'm sure Lexis is going to have that shortly because people like me are standing up front of places like this and telling you this. So as I said, these are some of the ways that you can use this big data. Danielle, what did you use it for?
So Westlaw had like a research challenge a few weeks ago for like a free blanket, so it wasn't like
Cool.
I just like wanted a blanket. And if you go to like litigation analytics, you can look up like a law firm. And so they suggested using it like for, I guess, for an upcoming interview. So they said to type in Jones Day to let it kind of pre-populate, and then explore their docket.
So an interesting way to do some employment research if you're interviewing with a firm that's big enough to be in here. So dockets.
Yeah, and then they just like asked a question about if you went to attorney, like which attorney had the most number of dockets in general. So up top, you just like and then just like answer the question. But you could also use it like beyond, I guess, for interviewing. I think it would be helpful, like if you were on the other side and you wanted to see like how many cases a certain law firm like won against a certain judge, they have like that information. Or if you were like working within the law firm and you wanted to see like what attorney worked with a certain judge or on a certain case, then like go to them. So like it's pretty practical.
Yeah, so as I said, slicing and dicing the various aspects of the data. one way I play around and try to learn and then compare is just coming up with sample searches. So if I didn't have a different example, actually, let's just go back. So one thing I was playing around with here on Westlaw is taking a look at attorneys. And since the name's been in the news, which is how I often find my examples, as you may have already noticed, I come up with a name in the news, so Michael Avenatti. And just to see what it tells me and what it does. And then I would compare that and do the same thing on Lexis and Bloomberg to see what they have. And I might notice, well, wait a minute, does Lexis even have attorneys? I'm not sure that it does because I didn't see it right up front. It might. I haven't, like I said, I'm no expert. But this is how I would compare and then go through each of the tabs because it's kind of interesting. Look at the outcomes, the type of case. So he does a lot of torts cases and see the different outcomes and the percentage that he won versus the percentage that maybe he didn't, at least for those cases that went to verdict. A lot of times some of the presentations I've been to talk about this time to outcome, so you can give clients a sense of, well, how long does this particular type of case take? So you can tell a client, all right, you know, you're going to have to be patient. This could take 18 months. Or, well, no, this kind of motion usually should be able to, on average, only takes however long it says. So as I said, that's just a quick demonstration and a couple of nice examples of how this is used. Again, I would talk to litigators who have used this and also, as always, check on the costs. So while you're still here in law school, if this is something that really interests you, you plan on being a litigator, take a look and play with it. So I also wanted to mention a couple of other neat technology tools. One thing I always love to show people, because people aren't aware it exists, is something called the Wayback Machine. If you all have parents my age, which you probably mostly do, you might have watched a cartoon Rocky and Bullwinkle with them. The Wayback Machine was a feature in Rocky and Bullwinkle, and the folks here took that name because at the time they came up with it, people my age were interested in the internet. What the Wayback Machine is essentially an internet archive, as it says. So if you get one of those horrible page not found error 404, does that sound familiar to anybody? No? Okay, yep, good. Some heads shaking. You can actually see if you can find that page in the Internet Archive. So I am going to take a look at extras page. And what the Internet Archive does is it takes a snapshot of all the pages. Now obviously it's not going to have every single page, but it's got a heck of a lot. So if you wanted to see what the Hofstra web page looked back in 1999, on February 8th, and what happens is a lot of the pictures or GIFs, as they say, are broken. So this isn't a great picture, but let's jump ahead and see if we can get a better picture at the next one. And there's some online videos, so again, a lot of the pictures wind up getting lost. But you get a sense. Let's see if we can find one, whoops, a little bit more recent. Why isn't that working? Oh, there we go. Oh, yes, I remember this. I was working at Hofstra by this time. Rather old-fashioned looking. Anyway, obviously, arbitrary curiosity is one reason, but a lot of times if you're trying to find something on the web and you get that annoying, page not found, if I copy the web address, if I copy the URL, plug it into that Wayback Machine search box, I can pull up the page when it was able to be found, sometimes not so long ago as 2005, but even a couple of years ago, and I find the information I'm looking for. And then who's ever asking thinks I'm a hero, which is always nice too, but the point being is that you can find, sometimes you can find what you're looking for here. So it's a really, really useful tool to know about. And all you have to remember is the name Wayback Machine, or Internet Archive if you're not a cartoon fan. Other tool I wanted to tell you about, which I'm actually kind of surprised more people don't use, and that's a password manager. In this day of privacy and all the crazy hacking that's going on, and you hear about how you should be changing your password every other day and using all these crazy nonsensical characters, and then how on earth do you keep track of it? The answer is a password manager. Anybody use one? Oh my goodness, how do you survive? At this point you have so many passwords for so much stuff. How do you remember it all? You Word doc, and what happens if, well, but what happens if, you know, your laptop crashes? Yeah. Pardon me? I know, who needs that? So there are things called password managers, and some of them are free or very inexpensive. I use one called LastPass. There's another one called Dashlane, another one called OnePass. Some of you may have noticed when I am here, let me go to Westlaw just because it's easier, and I sign out. So normally I'm signed in, but some of you may notice if it expires, and I go to login, it fills it in. As you all know, I'm a terrible typist, so that's one advantage, but it also remembers it. And this little symbol here, that's LastPass. That's the one I happen to like. Actually, for LastPass, just for an individual user, it's for my needs. It doesn't cost anything. I also can use it on my iPhone and iPad, or your phone. It doesn't have to be an iPhone. It also works on phones and tablets. It will generate passwords for you if you really want to be intense about your password security, so that, you know, it's not like a phrase you remember that you use on 4 different websites with maybe one variation. I highly recommend it. That's why I'm shocked you don't use it. I couldn't exist without it. Yeah, Priscilla.
Are you saying that's like an app for most things? Because nowadays, Apple, like at least for AppleCare, it already has its own password manager type of thing, so it automatically saves all your passwords.
Yeah, it does, and that is an option. Yes, it is different. This is a third-party independent. A lot of my life is on Google now, or, you know, a lot of people's on Apple. I will talk about privacy and Google in a second, but I choose not to rely on one of the big companies for that. Google has enough of my information. I don't want to give them any more. Apple has enough of my information. I don't want to give them any more. This is an independent company. So yeah, I mean, you probably have it in the cloud, so, you know, if one particular device went belly up, you could download it. I mean, that's the advantage of LastPass too. It is in the cloud, so if my particular laptop goes, I still have access to it. Some people are uncomfortable with that because, you know, your bank or whatever, it's in the cloud, everything's hackable, but at this point, given how much we rely online, you have to decide on your level of comfort. And my level of comfort is everything's hackable, and this is just my rationalization. It doesn't have to be yours. I'm figuring my bank's hackable, everywhere is hackable. I'm going to take my chances on at least a reputable company that helps me in my daily existence. So that's my just, for what it's worth, take it or leave it. And at least on the interesting tech stuff, last but certainly not least, as we've been talking about it all semester, Google. So I've shown you one advanced Google, but first let's talk a little bit more about privacy. And along these same lines, whatever system you're using, find out what their policies are. Find out what Apple's policy is in saving your passwords and where else they might give out your information. You've all heard, I'm sure, you know, do the same with Facebook. Set your settings, again, whatever your comfort level is, but be aware of how these companies are sharing your information. So as you can see, I just Googled Google policies, and we could take a look. And so, for instance, I know that I have this particular account Google set up to remember my searches. Do you know how your Google account is set? Do you know, is Google remembering your searches? Find out. Make your choice, but make that choice knowingly. So let's see. So data and personalization. So let's see if I can. So if I go to, I think I have it here. Nope. So I think I have to go to my account. So if I go to Google account, so if you Google my account, and I go to data and personalization, and then I have my activity controls, and see I have web and app activity on, because I've made that decision affirmatively for this account. Now, like many of you probably, I have multiple Google accounts, and I'm just careful what I do on that account. Just be aware. As I also mentioned, we looked at one feature, Google Advanced Search feature. Remember when I talked about the site search, which I still think is one of the most useful things I know in terms of how to search the web, is being able to tell Google, I want to search a particular site for whatever word. So we did that a lot for agencies, because the agency's own search sites were not that great. So I put the word SITE colon, the web address, and then after the web address, space, and whatever search terms. But if I Google Advanced Google, we get to this page, Advanced Search, and there are other ways I can search Google. So another useful one is this file type. If I want to find a document in just PDF, I know a lot of you journal students are really into PDFs, or maybe I want to find a PowerPoint presentation. I could do that too, and just choose the different file type here. For whatever reason I'm looking for a particular language, you can see region, or sometimes less updated. Sometimes if I want to find really current information, I'll tell Google, you know, just find me information in the last month or the last week. So those are some advanced search types on Google. And Google does actually have some good help. So if you want to go back later and check out your whether Google saves your search and you can't remember how to do it, if you, again, Google Help, you can search actually all of their help sites. And they're actually pretty good about that. And if you are a Google fan, and I am half a Google fan and half afraid of what Google knows about me, you can find out a lot of the different features Google has, and it's amazing how much there is. So I don't know if you've heard of Google Keep, which is like an organizer. Google Voice, you can actually get a phone number from Google. You'll know about Google Translate, I imagine. Google Drive, you all know about Google Drive, right? Do you use that, or how about Dropbox? Okay, yeah, wonderful tools. And if we go to that more, you get this whole list of different. I am a fan of Google Alerts. So let's see, is Alerts here? Yeah, so if I do Control F, Google Alerts, what Google Alerts does is it allows me to tell Google, I want you to search for this particular phrase. So I want you to search for Game of Thrones dragons, because I like the dragons on Game of Thrones. So as I think I've mentioned before, I can tell Google to set that up, and I can say, alert me anytime you find Game of Thrones dragons, which right now would probably be pretty crazy because it'd be like hundreds of thousands. But anyway, and I can tell Google how often I want to see this alert, once a day, once a week, and every time Google will run a search and give me the results. So it's kind of like Alexis Westlaw alert, only it's on Google. Okay, and last but not least, and then we'll take a break and then talk about the exam. Since we're talking about privacy, Google is not the only search engine on the planet. There are lots of other ones. There are specialized ones. Actually, here on Wikipedia is a whole list of different types of search engines, different subject-specific. They do different things. I know we all go to Google. I do it too. I might take a look at this if I've really got a specific thing, aspect or topic I want to search, although I'll still go to Google first. But the one search engine I always remember is called DuckDuckGo. And kind of silly name. The reason I remember DuckDuckGo is, unlike Google and pretty much many Bing and Yahoo and a lot of the other search engines, they make their name on not tracking your searches. So I will go to DuckDuckGo if I want to search something very private. Good to know about if that is a concern. Any questions? Let's come back at 5:40 and we will chat about the exam. And if you could pass up the copies, the extra copies. Okay. So this is what you will pick up on the morning of either May 6, 7, or 8. It will look slightly different. Instead of question number X in the upper right-hand corner, you will see a number between 1 and 21. The reason for that is there are 21 of you. And on the bottom, you'll see the footer. It will also have the same number. So as it says here, this exam is worth 400 points. To earn them, you must answer all of the questions. So again, thankfully only a few of you, but there still are a few of you in your assignments. You just miss a part of a question. Be very methodical. Make sure you answer all parts of all of the questions. Whether that means you stop at the end of each part and make sure you do it. Create yourself a checklist. Stop at the end of when you finish all of the questions and make sure you've answered all the exams. Maybe do all of those things. Whatever works for you to help you make sure that you answer all the questions. If you try to answer a question, I can give you some credit. If you leave it blank, I cannot. Okay, you will pick up your version of the exam in room 102B. Jackie Kassar will be there to give it to you. This is an anonymous exam, so do not speak to me that day. I will take those of you who are interested down to show you Jackie's office at the end of class if you'd like to go on a very short field trip. Otherwise, make sure you can find room 102B. And again, you choose to do that at 9 a.m. on May 6, 7, or 8. That's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Please be there at 9 a.m. Jackie won't hand it out before, so don't get there at 8 expecting Jackie to hand it out then. But please don't show up at 10:30 or 11. First of all, Jackie can't sit in her seat for 2 hours straight because she's got other things she has to do. And second of all, you'll be putting yourself at a disadvantage. I had a student do that once, and he put himself at a disadvantage. So do be on time. I mean, if you hit traffic and it's 9:05, it doesn't matter. It's not like a regular, this is considered a take-home, so it's not like a regular monitored exam. If you're 9:05, nobody's going to care. But don't be, as I said, there at 10:30. Okay, so you are going to email your exam. You'll see the email address below. And on the first page of that answer, make sure to put your exam number. Again, not your name. This is anonymous. I'm going to be looking at the answers not knowing who they are. The question number, again, that question number is in the upper right-hand corner. And advanced legal research, obviously. So, because this will be going to the law exams, which is the OAR, the Office of Academic Records, standard email address. So they will know, they need to know what class it's for. So that's why you need to remember to put advanced legal research. All answers must be submitted to that address by 5 p.m. the same day. Again, please include the course name, your exam number, and my last name in the subject line. So again, it's on the first page and within the subject line, make sure to put all that information. I also need you to return all of the question sheets. So the sheet you pick up from Jackie in the morning, you can put in the book return slot in the library in the afternoon, and I will point that out on our field trip for those of you who join me to go downstairs. Otherwise, again, make sure you know where the book return. It's right by the circulation desk. So you know the big desk when you first walk in, not where the public safety guard sits, but where the big round desk. It's as you walk toward in the library, there's a book return slot. Okay, once you submit your exam to law exams, you should receive an automatic reply confirming receipt. Make sure you receive this this reply, also make sure that you attach, sometimes you send an email and forget to put the attachment in. Don't do that this time. Make sure you attach your answers and make sure you receive the confirmation reply. This way, if there's any computer glitch, you'll have that email to show that you did submit it. So make sure you attach your document. Make sure you back up your document, whether it's Dropbox or Google Drive or a flash drive or whatever your favorite way is. This is a true story. 2 years ago, a student in my class worked all day, was doing his exam, and at about 4:10, his computer crashed. And I'm not making this up. I swear to you, I'm not making this up. And he broke the rules and came to talk to me, which is another story I'll mention in a minute. Went to IT, went to university IT. They, some of the IT folks are really good at recovering. They could not recover it. He did not back it up. He had to do the exam. He was not a happy camper, needless to say. This is a sad story. He actually did okay in the course, but he was, so please I don't want to have to tell this story next year that it was someone from last year. Back it up, whatever works for you. Okay, so to prove that I mean this, parts 3 and 4, so putting your name on the answer sheet and putting your name in the subject line, are worth 5 points each. So that's 10 easy points right there. Some of you have occasionally forgotten to put your names on your assignment. It's no big deal. I didn't deduct for that. This one I'm going to mean business on because it does make a difference in processing the exam and making sure that the exam gets to OAR and then the proper exam gets to me. Okay, so substance. What this exam is a guided research report. As it says here, I'm looking forward to you coherently explaining your strategy. Yes?
So we come to you when we pick up like a hard copy of our question.
You go to room 102B, not me.
Okay, so we go to 102B, we get a hard copy. And then our email responses, we're just like opening up a Word document and writing our answers in something.
So this template will be on the course website. It is not there now, but you will see I have added a section on the home page. So under here, welcome to Advanced Legal Research and all the course documents. If you scroll down to the bottom, it says the final exam scheduled for May 6, 7, 8. You choose one of those dates. Download the template from the final exam page. So I click on the final exam page and the template will be here. Exactly what you're looking at in a Word format.
And so where would you like us to put like our name, our exam number, and our questions like up here on the top?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Other questions?
I thought we're not putting the name on it. Isn't it the number? The exam number?
You're absolutely right. Thank you for catching that. No names. Just your exam number. You want to put my name, as it says here, in the subject line. Again, because that's going to help Office of Academic Records. No names. Good catch. Thank you, Rosa. Other questions? Amy, you.
No, well, actually, for like when you put on the first page, it's going to feel like a dumb question, but do you want the first page just to have that information, or is it like the heading like we normally do on all the other assignments? Because it says just on the first page, so I don't know if it's just that's all information you want on the first page and we start the exam on the second page, or am I just thinking too much into this?
I just need that information on the first page. You don't have to worry about putting a header if that's, I'm not sure I understand your question.
So like, does it need is like technically the first page a cover page?
Yeah.
So
So
our
what's-
answers start on page 2.
Yes. It might help. Hold that thought. It's not a dumb question. Hold that thought. Let me get through explaining the front page. We'll flip to the second page, which is when the questions start. If that doesn't answer your question, then ask it again. Okay. So on this first page, so guided research report, coherently explain your research strategy for the issue below. Now notice you see a blank space. You will see an issue. You will see different issues. There are a whole bunch of different issues. But you will see an issue, just like when we went over the issue for our assignment, you will see a statement of an issue. So as it says here, the more detail you give to search, the more how to search, the better. So what I mean by how to search, you want to make sure to give me keyword searches. You want to make sure if you check the table of contents, which I very much hope you do, hint, hint, that you did that. When I talk about detail, when a resource exists in both print and online, you may use either. I'm guessing you're all going to go online, but if you want to use the books, that's fine too. What I mean by resource is encyclopedia sections, ALR or law review titles, proof of facts articles, treatise sections, U.S. codes, CFR, state code sections, administrative decisions, all the things we just talked about in our research strategy. Those are all resources. Highlight resources that lead to other ones. So if you find a secondary source that leads you to a code section, mention the Amdur proof of facts led me to a code section. Tell me what the code section is. Make sure you give me complete citation. So 21 USC 343 is the code section along with the title, misbranding or false advertising, whatever the name is. So for your issue, and again, you don't see it now, that's the one thing you don't get ahead of time. You will see the issue. I am not testing you on issue spotting. I have tried to review that with you, but I haven't tried to teach that to you. Hopefully you've learned that in legal writing and other courses. So I'm not testing issue spotting. Each of your fact patterns will have the necessary terminology. So I'm making it easier for you. I will, however, consider the quality of searches. So if you're searching healthcare law, if you take our example from our class example, if you're searching cases for healthcare law, that's not a very good search. Search ERISA, preemption, liability, HMO. However, if you're searching healthcare for treatises, that is a pretty good search. So again, this is context specific, because you're going to find treatises named healthcare law that might be very useful for our client's issue. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. So, as it says, you may not work together. This is another difference from the assignments. You're welcome to work together on the assignments. You may not work together on this exam. The guideline is no human contact. You can use Lexis, Westlaw, Google, print, but no humans. So, not each other, not library staff. Not social media, Facebook, Instagram, smoke signals, whatever human contact you might imagine. If you encounter problems, if it has to do with the exam, you'll talk to Jackie in 102B. If it's IT, you'll talk to the IT folks. Do not talk to me. I'm trying to keep this as anonymous and fair as possible. You will lose points if you talk to me that day. And yes, some of you are going to see me just because if you're in the library, I work in the library that day. I'm not staying home, sadly. So I will acknowledge your existence, but that's about it. And I'm not meaning to be rude. I'm trying to be fair. So again, Jackie, if you have any issues with the exams, IT, if you have any IT issues, you really shouldn't have issues with the exam. I'm going it over verbatim here. And I will be available for questions from pretty much now until 5 p.m. the Sunday before the exam, and I will check my email over that weekend. And the last time I'll check is 5 p.m. that Sunday. So whatever questions you have, and I'll talk about tips for studying after we go through the exam. Whatever questions you have, I'll be very happy to answer between now and then. If they are general questions, I'll probably put them up on this final exam page, so you may want to check this now and again, especially before you take the exam. Again, you'll have all your notes, just not people. Any questions about that? And I believe I'm also allowed to say, although I don't want to get too serious, honestly, that it will be considered an honor code violation if you do talk to people for the exam. Okay, let's go to the substance of the exam. And Amy, hopefully I'm answering your question here because you will turn the page and you will see the questions here. And you can put your answers in the questions beneath each question, and I'll talk about formatting in just a moment. So what you see are two columns up top, secondary sources, column part 1, primary sources, part 2. So for part 1, looking at the questions, That will apply to the secondary sources that are listed under Secondary Sources Part 1. You will answer all 3 questions for the 3 types of secondary sources. You have a choice for encyclopedias. You can choose AMJUR, CJS, or ALR. You only have to choose one. Inevitably, 1 or 2 students do more than one. I won't take off points for that, but you don't have to, so why bother? And you will also, in addition to one of those encyclopedias, you'll need to look at law reviews, and you'll need to either look at treatises or practice materials, and I'm not going to be very fussy about what's a treatise. So if you choose proof of facts, if you choose a treatise title, if you choose cause of action, that'll be fine. Don't choose regular AMJUR, because that's a regular encyclopedia. Don't choose CJS, because that's an encyclopedia. Don't choose ALR, again, because that's an encyclopedia. So pretty much anything not listed in the 2 top bullet points, if it's a secondary source, will work for the 3rd bullet point. Make sure you know what secondary sources are. Okay, so for part 1, for those secondary sources, I'm asking you for each type, answer questions 1 through 3. So you'll choose encyclopedias. So say you choose ALR, you will answer questions 1 through 3. Then you look at law reviews and answer questions 1 through 3. And then you'll look at treatise practice materials and answer 1 through 3. And Amy, that's where you'll put your answer. So does that answer your question? No. Okay, then you got to ask it again.
No, I was asking about the heading part, like where we put our exam number.
That's just on the top of the front page.
Oh yeah, that's what I was like. Does it need to be on a separate cover page?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could just do it like we normally do, like a heading and then.
Yeah, that's fine. Some students have given me cover pages. Some do it right on top. Either way is fine. I'm not
Yeah,
that fussy
that was
about
my answer. Thank
I'm
you.
not fussy about that. I am fussy about the organization I did go through. So again, encyclopedias 1, 2, 3, law reviews 1, 2, 3, treatises, practice materials 1, 2, 3. So look for your topic in all 3 types. Again, make sure you answer all the questions in column 1. For each resource, so for each of the encyclopedias, law reviews, treatises, describe the following. Which resource and database did you choose? And by that I mean, so did you go to Lexis? Did you go to Westlaw? Did you go to Bloomberg? Did you go to print? You get to choose. You want to do the whole exam on Westlaw? That's fine. You want to do it all on Lexis? That's fine. You can do it all on Bloomberg? That's fine. I kind of wonder, but that's your choice. You want to switch around? That's fine too. But you get to choose. Okay, so you need to include for me the title of the publication. So especially that first one. Did you choose AMJUR, CJS, or ALR? An author where applicable. So an author is applicable for law review. It's not really applicable for AMJUR. You usually don't find the author. Date of publication or website with the date last updated. So again, that's going to be applicable for date last updated, usually for treatises and the encyclopedias. But for law reviews are written on a certain date. If you find a law review from article from 2011, just tell me, like you usually do in a law review citation, 2011. And you're going to tell me if you used any filters pre or post search. Did you filter by jurisdiction? Did you go to the top search bar and type in AMJUR? If that's what you did, that's fine. Just tell me that. So for question 2, state in detail all the steps you took to get your results. Make sure you include the most effective search terms or technique for each resource. Okay, so tell me. Typed in ALR. And then I searched liability HMO, and then I got my results, and then I scanned through, and on the second one I found AMJUR proof of facts. Liability HMO was my best search. You might say, I searched liability, I went to a treatise, I went to, I went to AMJUR, no, let me find a better example. I went to a treatise, and I went to, what was the name of that? Tort liability, I think was. Liability for torts, I think was one of the treatises we found. I found my first result and went to the table of contents, and that led me to section 9.43, even though my results led me to 9.42. So that's, when I say technique, I mean table of contents. Search terms are just a keyword search. Hopefully that's straightforward. If it's not, speak up and tell me what's confusing. searching, think of question number 2 as the steps and searches that you took. And think of question number 3 as the best results and how you got there. So question 3, give the full citation for the best titles or sections, and again, it depends on the resource you found and the search term or process used. Include the names, numbers, and sections, and paragraph and titles of the articles, encyclopedias, or treatises. So what do I mean by that? So encyclopedia, Amjur. You might find Amjur, the health topic, section 143, and the name of that is HMO. The name of that section is HMO. For law reviews, Law Review 41, Hofstra Law Review, page 143 from 2011. I'm sure that's not exactly accurate, but you get the idea. And the title, Liability of HMOs, Revisited. I'm just making all of that up. But that's what I mean by information. Yeah,
I don't understand the difference between 1 and 3.
put that one on hold.
Okay.
I will get to that in a second. Okay. There may be numbers of sections. Treatises sometimes number their paragraphs. Let me know the number of the paragraph. Let me know the name of the treatise. Let me know the name of the numbered paragraph. Usually each of the paragraphs, each of the sections in Amjur have numbers. If it's an article, if it's a proof of facts article, it might have a section number within the proof of facts article. Again, if it's okay, so just make sure process used includes name, number, section, paragraphs, titles, articles, encyclopedias, or treatises. Okay. These questions are intentionally duplicative. We're not getting to your answer now, Rebecca. The reason I am doing that is to make sure you give me the information that I want. If you want to, you can tell me. I mentioned, so I asked you for the best search in number 2. In number 3, I asked you for the searches used. You could say, see my search from number 2. If you've given me the information in one of the other questions, feel free to refer back. Just make sure you give it to me in one of them. So the difference between 1 and 3, to answer your question, 1 focuses more on the source. 3, I'm asking you for your best results and how you got them. So 1, I'm not really asking about the search or how you got to your results or what your results are. I'm just asking you what did you search. 2 focuses on the steps and searches, and 3 focuses on your best results and how you got there.
So for number 1, if we get search results, are we just, because for me, when I do a search, like I'm picking the best one for you and I'm going to put that as my number 1. So for me, it sounds like you're asking for the same thing for number 3. Could it, I guess you're saying it could be the same exact one.
Same exact one.
So for number 1, you're asking include title of publication. So does that mean, for example, a law review title?
Yes.
Title of a law review article. So then number 2, I would explain for you the steps that I used to get there. And then for 3, you're saying give the full citation for the best one, but presumably I have given you that already.
But 1, you need to tell me that you searched Lexis or Westlaw and that you went to law reviews. Or maybe you searched all the secondary sources. Maybe you did a pre-search filter. Did a pre-search filter for secondary sources and did a post-search filter for law reviews.
Okay.
And if you mention that if you mention it in number 1, and then you get to number 3, you can say the best law review I found is I mentioned in number 1.
Okay.
Or you could say it again in number 3. Either way. Again, I just wanted to make sure you give me what you did, those post-search filters, what you found, the law review you found, and what searches you did and what steps you took to get there. So law review is more likely going to be searches because there are no table of contents. But if you search Amjur, you might have gone to the table of contents, and that might have been how you got there. If that's the case, then tell me that.
Okay.
I'm really less concerned which number you fit it in, and more concerned that you get all of these pieces of information somewhere.
Okay.
That's why I want you to group it by source, because then I can scan and say, law reviews, all right, you got everything great.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I don't think any of you would do this, but it happened once. do not copy and paste your results and just plug it in there and expect me to find it. I want to see that you can identify the results and make a choice as to what the best results are. And good, I'm seeing some weird, like, you can't be serious looks. Glad to see it. That's the answer I want. Okay, that is secondary sources. Any questions? Feel free to come back if you think of any. So part 2 pretty much works the same way with some notable differences. First of all, as you'll see, the list under part 2 is longer. There are 5, well, really 4 types of information: codes, federal and state, and I'll talk about those question marks in a second. Judicial decisions, federal and state. Regulation, codes, federal and state. And again, codes, not federal register, not a state register. Administrative decisions, guidance, federal and state. You need to cover those 4 types of primary sources. So what you'll be searching for your issue are, first of all, statutory codes. You'll search federal. You will see a state instead of those question marks on your question sheet. Everybody's going to have a different state, and none of you will have New York. So once you get your state, you'll also want to look for judicial decisions, both federal and whatever state you have. As I said, regulation codes, federal and whatever state you have, and administrative decisions and guidance, federal and state, whatever state you have. And then you're going to see in part 2, same instructions. Please organize your answers by source type. So first you'll answer questions 1 through 3 for federal and state codes. Then you'll do 1 through 3 for judicial decisions, 1 through 3 for regulation codes, again for all federal and state, and 1 through 3 for admin decisions and guidance, federal and state. Again, make yourself a checklist to make sure you do not forget any of those 4 types. This is what I was talking about earlier when I say people tend to forget regulations and admin materials, admin decisions and guidance. Inevitably, a couple of students forget, and it breaks my heart because I got to take off points because you didn't give me any. So, what are the questions you're answering for all 4 types, including regulations and admin decisions? So again, the resources and database you chose, so Westlaw, Bloomberg, website, whatever. Again, filters, pre and post. So probably for federal, you'll go to USCA, maybe you'll do your search before and then filter afterwards. If that's how you do it, fine, that's a perfectly good way to do it. Or if you just type in USC and then do your search, however you like to do it. So filters used, pre and post, and date resource was last updated. So again, the currentness of Westlaw, or Bloomberg if you're using Bloomberg, not the date your section was last amended. We just went over that. We're all good with that? Do you need me to show you again? I don't see anybody jumping up and down saying yes, please. Okay. So again, for codes, you'll be looking at the federal USC, for state, whatever your state code is, for judicial decisions, the cases, federal cases, and whatever your state is, for regulations, your state regulation code, and the CFR for federal, and admin decisions, again, federal and whatever your state will be. Make sure you know how to find all that, especially the admin decisions and guidance can be a little tricky. Probably you'll want to do your search and then filter, do a post-search filter. And just tell me how you did that in question 1 for all of those 4 types. Question 2, again, state in detail all the steps you took to get to your results. So again, a little bit duplicative. Make sure you include the most effective search terms or technique for each of the 4 types. So, did you get a reference from secondary source is a technique. Did you find cases by searching and looking at key numbers? Remember, you want to do multiple approaches. Did you use the index for the CFR because you were having a hard time with the terminology? Or did you do a keyword search? Did you use the table of contents, which for the US code and the CFR and the state codes, I very much hope you do. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. In other words, look at the table of contents. Again, remember to do for both state and federal. That's another common error that people run into. And again, similarly, give the full citation information for each of the 4 types of primary source. So tell me what your best result was for US code, for your state code, statutory code, for the CFR, for the state regulatory code, for the judicial decisions. Include the date containing your resources, your section. Include the date the resources containing your sections were last updated. So again, if you did this in question 1, you can refer back. And any updating information for your cases, don't forget to Shepherdize and key cite your cases. And do a very short analysis. If you do have a red flag, do a very short analysis to see if it applies to your holding. Don't spend a lot of time. Tell me what you did. Question 3. Where applicable, state the name of the section. So that's going to be applicable for the codes. So the statutory codes and regulatory codes, they all have section names. Yeah.
How concerned are you with relevancy? Like, obviously, it's better to find the most relevant results, but if we're taking a stretch, would you rather us write an answer than not have one at all?
Yes. Again, I'm giving you the terminology in the issues, so I'm hoping you don't have a hard time, but if for whatever reason you do your best. You will get credit. I mean, if you're totally off in left field, I may have to take off some points, but even if you're totally off in left field, if you make an effort, I will give you some credit. And especially for cases, don't spend too much time reading cases. If it's, read the top summary. If it sounds somewhat relevant to your issue, that's fine. And like I said, when you do Shepherdize or key cite, you only have to do one. Do Shepherdize or key cite. If it is a red flag, take, as I said, no more than 5-minute analysis to see if you can figure out whether your specific holding. And just tell me what you did. And I should mention throughout, tell me what you did. I said when we were looking at the first page, the more information the better. There are no word limits. If you don't know whether or not to include it, include it. No word counts necessary. Don't worry about that. If you're not sure, include it. So what I said, yeah.
Sorry.
No, this is great.
For each one, are we just giving you one source? So for a law review article, I'm giving you one law review article in question 1, and then it could be my best one as well. So it's not like you're asking me to go to the table of contents and find other relevant sources. You're just asking for one.
So for secondary sources, 1 is fine. Okay. If you don't struggle to find the one relevant statute or regulatory code section. If you find a couple, and I'm telling you, go to the table of contents. And I can tell you in some instances there's more than one relevant. If you only give me one of the 2 or 3 relevant, I won't do that. But you need to tell me, basically, you need to go to the table of contents. Does that make sense? So what you might want to do, especially for part 2, is make a checklist. Federal and state codes, federal and state judicial decisions, federal and state regulation codes, federal and state admin decisions or guidance. And then just sort of check them off as you go, so you make sure, maybe add Shepherds and key cite under the cases heading. Make sure you check off as you go, so you make sure that you answer all of the questions. You can use the question sheet, you can use our research checklist. Eli.
Maybe this was her question, but was she like possibly asking that is it possible you can have 1 and 3 have the same thing, just repeated?
Yes.
Just, that's all it is.
Yeah, your
For
best
each
section
of
may,
the 4, you
Yes.
just have like 1 and 3 match, 1 and 3 match, 1 and 3 match. And that could be for the whole,
So
the whole
again,
assignment possibly.
one is more of the resource. So the USC, information about what you're searching. So the federal code, you're searching the USC. It was last updated probably by the time you take it May 1, sometime around May. Question 1, you may or may not tell me the results. That's up to you. Question 2, you're going to tell me your searches, and you'll wind up with probably the results. Question 3 is really focusing on that result. So technically, it doesn't have to be in question 1, it doesn't have to be in question 3. But if you put it in question 1, that's fine too. If that works better for you. Like I said, I just want all of this information. And I find that if I ask it repeatedly, it's more likely that I'll get it, and that way you get full credit. So for instance, if you put your results in question 1 and not in question 3, I'm not picking it. If you don't put it anywhere, then I have it. Okay, so this is critical. All the issues that you'll be looking at will have secondary sources. We'll have relevant secondary sources for that issue for each of the categories. So there will be relevant encyclopedia, there will be relevant law review, there will be relevant treatise. If you find close enough, I will give you full credit. But you should find something for the secondary sources. Similarly, all of the issues will have relevant federal and state codes, statutory codes. They will also have relevant federal regulatory codes. You should be able to find them. They may not have relevant state regulatory codes. States are very hit or miss in what they've got in their regulations. If you're not finding it, don't panic. It may not be there. Tell me what you did. Tell me what you found. And even if you don't find a relevant one, you will get most, if not all, full credit.
Or something like a secondary source, you said there's all relevant sources on there. Do you have like an answer that you're looking for? Is there a specific source?
If you find a source I haven't seen before that looks good, I'm good. If you find a source that's even close that I haven't seen before, I'm good. Josh?
For the law reviews, is there a specific jurisdiction that are we using in the state? But not
If you find a well, think about what we talked about in class. Law reviews, it's not necessarily the best idea to narrow by jurisdiction because maybe in the Hofstra Law Review, there's a great article about California law, right? However, state codes, that's a different story entirely. Okay, so you will definitely find state and federal statutory code sections. You'll definitely find federal regulatory code sections. You may or may not find state regulations, state regulatory code sections, and you may or may not find relevant administrative decisions or guidance, federal or state. And don't spend too much time worrying about relevance for those either. Just want to see that you understand what they are and how to find them. Again, tell me what you did, tell me what you found, tell me if you didn't find anything, tell me that. And that's also important. If you just don't find anything, tell me, I didn't find anything. If you leave it blank, I think you skipped it. I will think you have skipped it. I'm talking about for everything.
Oh, okay.
I'll get to B in a second. But yes, for B also. So B is legislative history. This is where I need to. Oh, good, I haven't logged out yet. So legislative history will be pretty much what you have seen on your workshop and your assignment. So I'm asking you to fill in the chart on page 4, and again, that should look very familiar. and what you're seeing are question marks. There will be a year in there for whatever that year is, and it's going to be different years for different. It's just going to be different years for amending legislation for your federal statutory code. So, for example, and what I mean by that year, let's get to our favorite example, Section 1144. So if your issue were the one we did in class, which it won't be, don't worry, I might ask you to fill in the chart on page 4 for the 1996 amending legislation. So who's going to tell me what the public law is for the 1996 amending legislation? Excellent. 104, 191. Oh, I didn't want to click on that. So I know, whoops, I clicked on it. So I know those of you in the back can't necessarily read this. So here's 1996, and Rebecca found 104-191 because it was in between the two semicolons. So that's our relevant information. So that's what I will be asking you, obviously for a different year, but you will see the year there for your best statutory code section. For the state code section, indicate the session law, citation, number, and year. So please don't forget this. I put it on top so you wouldn't forget it, because when I used to put it on the bottom, people forgot it. So all you need to do for your state code section is just tell me what the enacting state session law is. Remember, enacting is the first one. So let's see if I can pull one up real quick. Let's see. I'm terrible at pulling up state code citations. Yeah, let's see what that does. Rats. All right, I'm just going to go to a random section here. It's not the one I was after, but it doesn't matter. So if this was your state code section, you would tell me 1990, chapter 396. Now again, remember different states have different names for their session laws, so that abbreviation may not be a C, it may be an L, it may say laws, it may be PL, it may be PA for public act. Amy, you're looking quizzical.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the state. For federal, we just found the public law number. You can find the name of the act by clicking on it. And that USCA really should just read USC section. I will fix that on the version I upload. So you already found the USC section. That's what you're basing the public law on. So you're going to fill in whatever you find on Westlaw. Again, remember, you will not find a document for every category, but you must indicate that you checked. If not, if you don't find a document, write none or not applicable or didn't find, just anything to let me know that you looked. You want to, again, make sure you understand the abbreviations on Westlaw. And if you understand the abbreviations in the documents, then this should really take you about 5-10 minutes. Question?
So is there a correct USC section for each issue that you're looking for?
Yes.
What was the question?
Is there a correct USC section for each issue? And the answer is yes. Actually, for some of them, there are multiple sections that are correct. And again, if you only list one, that's fine. I'm not asking for a complete research report here. If you find one relevant section, that's fine. Again, yeah.
So the year you give us, will that, what if it's not there?
Then you found the wrong section.
Oh.
So what I suggest, your perfect timing, because what I'm just about to suggest, what you might want to do when you get to the statutory code section and you find your U.S. code section, flip ahead, look at that year, and then make sure it's in the credits. Now, the other thing I'll say about this is legislative history section. So if you understand what the documents are and you understand the abbreviations, it should be pretty straightforward. Also, it's worth a lot less than any other of the parts of the exam. If you get to that point and you're not finding your year and you don't have time to redo for whatever reason, pick a different one and do your best. I can't give you full credit because you won't have found the right one, but I can give you partial credit. Don't panic on legislative history. It's just plain old exam strategy. Focus your efforts and time on the important parts, which are, in this case, worth more points. Don't skip it, because then I can't give you points, but if you're really struggling, don't think you have to, spend all your time on this and then skip part 3. The other thing about legislative history, again, remember, as I said, what the different document types are. So remember, on Westlaw, what are hearings called? Testimony. And congressional record equals testimony. Hearings on Westlaw are called testimony. And the congressional record equals debates. Okay. Other questions, or shall I move on? Part 3. Part 3 is essentially the evaluation. You have been doing some version of this in every assignment. You pretty much did pretty close to this question in the assignment 5 that you just turned in today. When I look at your assignment 5, I am going to put comments in that particular question. Please look at those comments. In fact, please look at all of the comments from all of the assignments, because I usually highlight where you went wrong. Occasionally, I will also highlight where you went right. Those comments are frequently, even back in assignment 1, have the exam in mind. I have a long-term view since I know what I'm doing here. So take a look, because sometimes I'll tell you, great evaluation. Or I will say, whatever I said in there, take a look. So what I'm asking you in part 3 worth 110 points. So leave time for this. I'll talk about exam strategy in just a minute. Make recommendations as to the research methodology you would recommend that your managing partner use to research your issue. You must justify your recommendations by explaining why you are directing the managing partner to a particular resource title or search strategy. Make sure to give specific recommendations for your issue. Do not just describe generic research techniques. So don't talk about what key numbers do. Talk about which key number is useful and how you found it. Talk about your searches, your actual keyword searches, the good ones. Don't talk about anything that doesn't work. Just talk about the successful strategies. Don't talk about, secondary sources are good because you learn terminology. See a little asterisk there? It says your partner received an A+ in advanced legal research, so do not insult her intelligence. So she knows why secondary sources generally are good. Talk about good secondary sources, like liability for torts in the treatise, or Amjur proof of facts, liability for third-party payor, or whatever the heck the title is. I'm getting my titles confused, but hopefully you get the idea. Specific secondary sources and how specific resources overall, secondary sources, code sections, decisions, and how you got there. Searches that you use, the fact that you want to check the table of contents. Don't forget to mention administrative materials and regulations. Now, I promise I say that a half a dozen times. I think I'm 2 or 3 shy still. So again, as it says here, make sure to specify any useful secondary sources identified and critical primary sources. So mention those code sections, mention those CFR sections, the state code, state regulation sections, if you found any. But you must also do more than just list the citations. Tell me how you found them. Give a strategy where to start. Usually that's going to be secondary sources, but give it which one and where you think they should start. And primary sources that should be consulted. Especially for people who find this organization confusing, sometimes a step-by-step approach. You don't have to do it that way. It just makes sense for you to do it another way, but if you're a little bit at sea on how to organize this, think about it. Okay, step 1. Go to Amdur and go to this particular section. This particular search was really good. From there, I got the reference to 21 USC 343. That was from your assignment, and that's for misbranding. I also did a keyword search. Remember, you want to do separate keyword searches, as we talked about today. I also did a keyword search in my statutes for liability HMO, and I also found this particular section. I checked the table of contents. There weren't any other useful sections. Or I checked the table of contents, and there was this great section. I went to the notes of decisions, and then I found this decision. I looked at the key numbers, and I found this great key number. I shepherdized my case is still good law. I then looked at administrative decisions. I did a keyword search. Didn't find any useful references anywhere else. I did a keyword search, and here is the administrative decision. Here's the regulatory code that I found, both federal and state. Question?
So we're essentially rewriting the steps that we already, that we wrote, or are you looking for new information?
I'm looking for you to bring it together as a description. So it
will be probably similar to what we wrote for the other sections,
Yes.
how we got there. Okay.
Yes. But do not refer back to the other section. This is the one
Right.
area where I want to see. So imagine if you had to research this, whatever particular issue it is. What would you want to see? You want to know search terms, right? If they found useful sections, yeah, you want to know the sections, right? So write this memo to yourself in 5 years, if that is a better way to think about it. So give a strategy where to start, searches used, specific secondary resources, and primary sources that should be consulted. I said that already. Step-by-step description. Okay, and as I just said, do not refer back to the other parts, so you must identify all of your steps and searches and resources in this part. So I talked about separate keyword search for codes, regs, and cases, looking at table of contents for code, for statutory codes and regulations, maybe secondary sources also. Again, don't explain the basics of general research techniques. Make sure you check notes of decisions or citing references. Yes?
So we're not evaluating any of the sources, right? It's just like, how did you get there and what was useful?
Yes. Your evaluation is happening in your head. This is good, this isn't good. You're just letting know what's good. So again, spend your time and energy in part 3 discussing the good resources. I'm not interested in what didn't work, so you don't have to, and that's true throughout, really. Essentially, don't give any citations without an explanation on how you got there. Or at least, it doesn't have to be step by step like in parts 1 and 2, but this is a great search. This got me to this particular section or resource. Okay, other questions? So I'm just going to pull up my list here of some tips for studying. Where'd my list go? this on the bottom. So I've given you some suggestions on how to organize. Do your best to organize. I will do my best to figure out what you need. But the more organized you are, the easier it will be for me. So spell check and proofread. I don't have to guess what you're saying. Think in advance before the day of the exam how you want to organize this. You'll have the question sheet. Like I said, the template will be up for you to download by tomorrow morning. If you want to add headings in there, that's fine by me, whatever works for you. Questions?
So you're saying we can go into the document and just mess with it a little bit, setting ourselves up?
Absolutely. Mess with it a lot if you like, as long as you include everything. And as I said, do it resource by resource. That's the one thing that makes a difference.
I know you have the questions written in here, but can we just do 1, 2, 3 and not copy and paste the question prompt each time?
In other words,
So for like one week it'll have all the questions, and then the next time it'll just be 1, 2, 3 without the actual questions, the
Do you
language
need
of
the
the question.
question prompt each time we answer it?
you mean the text of my question?
Correct, yes.
No. If you organize it by resource, then no, you don't.
Okay.
So if you do all encyclopedias 1, 2, 3, I
Right.
don't need the text of the questions 1, 2, 3.
Right, okay.
Likewise for primary sources, you do all statutory codes 1, 2, 3, decisions 1, 2, 3, and again, remember federal and state. Yeah, no, I don't need the text of my question.
Okay.
All good questions. Again, you can use whatever resource other than humans you want. Lexis, Westlaw, web, print. None is better than the other than how successful it is for you to use. This was originally a 4-hour exam. You now have 8 hours. So I think you should not have trouble finishing it in the 8 hours, but still be very careful. Don't fall into the trap of spending 5 hours on part 1. I can tell when that happens when I read the answers. So budget yourself time, set your alarm on your phone, whatever works for you. I have to typically, and you can see, I can write that down. I would say over the course of 8 hours, maybe 2 hours for part 1, 2 hours for part 2, 2.5 hours for part 2, 2.5 hours for part 3, and that leaves you some time, that leaves you about an hour for lunch. Do eat lunch, seriously. Brain needs food. As I said, I'll respond to whatever questions you email me. If it's a general question about the exam, I'm going to put it on that final exam page. I'll also reply to your email, of course, but it'll also go up on the final exam page. When in doubt, include the information. I know I said this already, but again, no word count, as many words as you want. Again, just don't copy and paste. For instance, on the legislative history question, don't copy and paste everything onto the exam sheet. You need to separate out and tell me which document is which, goes into which section in the table. Again, remember, let me know if you use a table of contents. Let me know if you get a reference from another source. And again, remember that you, in addition to references, you still need to do separate keyword searches for the 3 different types of, well, really the 4 different types of primary sources. Cases, statutes, cases, regulations, admin decisions, and guidance. Question?
So let's say for a statute, the way I found it was through a secondary source, and I had written it down, for example. Do you not want us to put that as the way we found it, or do you want us to have more details? Like, I saw it in a secondary source, but then I did a keyword search. Or is it sufficient just to say, well, I saw it in a secondary source, so I clicked on it in the secondary source?
The second thing you said, I found it in a secondary source. I did a separate keyword search and found the same section. I did a separate keyword search and I found a different section. Whatever you find.
You're saying we can't have the same keyword search for, it has to be different every time?
I didn't say that.
That's what,
If you find it, whatever keyword search works.
So we can repeat keywords.
If it works, repeat it. Absolutely. And remember to shepherdize and key cite cases. I'm getting up to my requisite 6 times there. Okay, make sure you remember where room 102B and the book return slot is. We will go down shortly and show whoever wants to go on a quick field trip, as I like to say. Strategy hints. Budget time in advance. I already talked about this. Make sure you leave plenty of time for the last question. As you can see from the point value, it's important. Again, checklist while studying. Make this in advance so you know you can go through. I mean, it will take you probably 10, 15 minutes. It's going to be a wonderful study tool and save you a lot of headache in the end. I did the research strategy session handout we just went through. That's a rather lengthy checklist. That exam question itself is a decent checklist. You might want to add to that. So those are starts for you for checklists, or make your own, whatever makes the most sense to each of you. Study suggestions. Do the exam with the assignment hypothetical. I've already kind of answered it, so you can save yourself a little time, but make sure you understand the questions. Make sure you understand how to use Lexis Westlaw, whatever your chosen resource is. So, make sure you know how to find AmJur. Make sure you know how to get to the table of contents. Make sure you know how to get to Westlaw and the legislative history. Make sure you know how to read the public law, the credit statement, or the history statement. So again, you can use the assignment hypothetical. You can use our class hypothetical if you really want to be thorough about it. Again, ask me questions. Go through it at least once. Go through this before Sunday before the exam, and make sure you understand the questions. I said in the very beginning, the very first class, that you will spend less time studying for this exam than you would for a typical class where there's only the exam at the end, and I still believe that's true because we've gone through the assignments, but you still need to spend some amount of time. So I think if you sit down with the question sheet and the assignment hypothetical, go through, make sure you can answer it. You've already done most of the research for the hypothetical for this one anyway. I think you'll be in good shape. Again, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, that's it for me. Any other questions? So before we go down, I just want to mention, next class we are going to do a review of what we've looked at, but it's going to be in the form of legal research Jeopardy. So you will divide up into teams. I will bring some munchies, bring your own beverage, whatever that is. And there'll be some incentive prizes courtesy of our various vendors, hopefully to make it a little bit more fun. So again, the main thing for you to remember next time is bring your own beverage. Okay, so let me just shut down, and then we'll go downstairs. Actually, I'm just going to do it this way.